Hi, welcome back to Mr. H Makes. This episode we're going to be looking at lighting and how to achieve the effects that you want. We'll be doing a bit of a dive into Unreal and covering some of the special effects you can do, like God rays, and also comparing the different light methods you can use and the results you can achieve. I'm using ray tracing lighting Unreal because I feel that probably approximates the UE5 workflow the best. So anyway, I made a character in CC3, tried to make a kind of hybrid toon look. So I'm not really going for realism, but just so you know. And one of the things I did was to use my own hair, well, not my own hair literally, but I made some hair, and I use a technique where you use the eyelash material for the hair. This leads to certain lighting issues, which I will tell you how to fix. Now, I don't know whether this is due to the hair that I've made in Blender and imported, but you tend to get a hard shadow, so there's certain things you can do to soften this. I also can't remember whether CC3 hair has this issue, but if you do have it, this is the way you can fix it, by softening the source radius of the light. In this case I'm using a point light, and you'll find that the same technique applies with other lights too, the rectangle lights and spotlights, I believe. So yeah, as I was saying, you can do the same with the rectangle light with the source width. I'll go into more detail on these lights, but one thing I should mention here, you will see some sort of artifacts, this blurry, how to describe it, shifting pixels in the shadows, and there's also a fix for that, which I will get to later, but at the moment I'm just messing around with the length and the height and width, just to get whichever lighting you find most appropriate for the scene. So this is kind of more of a outdoor daylight lighting. Yeah, so the sort of blurry shifting pixel thing in the shadows you can fix by changing the samples per pixels by upping them, increasing them, and you can see the effect there. There are a couple of other techniques you can use, which I'll go through, and I made a level from pieces of a free pack, which I will link down below. And added some atmospheric fog, and this tends to be better or takes care of your skies and the general haziness and air pollution. And as in that note, the sky atmosphere actor replaces that. And by the way, you can get all your things like lights and fogs and stuff from this menu on the left here. So the direct light, which is marked as light source in my world outliner, that gives you your main sort of brightness in the whole scene. It's like effectively what the sun is. And you can alter that by changing the intensity. There's a certain shortcut key to rotate the light. At the moment I'm kind of making a mistake trying to rotate the individual axes. One of them does work, but the shortcut to this is that you can access it by pressing Ctrl and L and just moving your mouse. And in some cases this is also linked to the sky sphere, so sometimes the actual sun moves around, or it will dictate how dark or bright the ambient light is. Anyway, since this is supposed to be kind of an interior tutorial, I better get on with that. So in this case I had an issue where the sun ray would not come through the window, so I fixed that by switching that off. It's quite possible that something to do with the material of the glass. I mean, this is something I bought in from a third party and I haven't actually checked the glass, but as you can see I didn't really need to bother because I changed the settings, the ray tracing settings. So the blinds allow light through, they're fine, but they make a kind of messy, noisy pattern at the back there. So as before, we use the ray tracing samples per pixel and try and up that. I actually had to go back and redo this scene. I deleted my Unreal project, so that's probably why it looks a bit naff compared to the others, but I just did it to demonstrate this particular section. And how you can change the source angle on this directional light. It's a second one I created actually. So we've kind of cleaned up that noisy shadow. Yeah, and using the screen percentage, you can actually get a better render, but it will kill your frames per second. And I'll say a little bit more on this screen percentage stuff at the end of the tutorial. But it is one of the ways to sharpen up your image quality. So one of the other fogs you can use is the Exponential Height Fog. And that tends to be better, yeah, for thicker, more volumetric effects. Whereas the atmospheric fog is kind of like the light pollution, and more, you know, what the sky looks like in the background. Sometimes it affects the lighting. But yeah, if you want thick, juicy fog, you can get it with the Exponential Height Fog. And here I am just messing around with the various post-process effects, just trying to increase the bloom. Just to demonstrate really that there's a number of different methods that you can use to affect your scene, but this post-process volume is separate. from the exponential height actor. So now I'm going into that and using that to alter the look. And now I am messing with the volumetric light settings, or sorry, the volumetric fog settings. And also enabling light shaft occlusion, which basically I think when it's enabled it will occlude objects in between the sun and the camera, will occlude the light shafts, will prevent them from coming through. And enable light shaft bloom. Now I believe that you don't actually need the exponential height fog to achieve the rays, or rather the sort of cloudy effect when you use this light source method. As you can see, I switched it off there, but it just generally helps the rest of the scene. But now we come, well, I personally had this issue where the sun disk was being annoying and putting that extra strong ray, so I just got rid of it. You can do that in the sky sphere. So when it comes to volumetric scattering on your directional light, it actually doesn't seem to do much until you switch the exponential height fog on, which is one of the reasons why I have them both. But just be aware that some of these effects seem to require both things. So just like we did earlier in the post-process, we messed around with the bloom settings. These light shafts have their own bloom settings within the directional light source. So in theory, you don't really need to mess around in the post-process volume, but you can just do it directly within the light source. Yeah, so that sun disk is still in there because this is the original footage that I recorded. But let's go a bit into the light shaft occlusion. So off means you get the full blast of light, on means the elements like the frame will occlude the light. You can add a fancy lens flare in the post-process volume. There are a bunch of different settings. You can change the shape of the lens flare, the intensity, the color, and that's up to how crazy you want to make it, really. So I'm just noodling around with fog. Scattering distribution, this is another setting you can mess with. To be quite honest, half of these I don't know what they are, but I just fiddle with them till I'm happy. You can change your fog color as well, but in this case I'm messing with the density and the height fall off, and I'm obviously getting lost in noodling around with fog in Unreal. I'll end that soon. Moving this exponential fog up and down is supposed to affect it. You can kind of see it there, but yeah, doesn't really do much. Now I noticed that these rays are not viewable from the side, so I had to try and figure out how I would do that if I wanted a scene like that. And there's a couple of ways, and to do this I used an asset from a free project, the Goddess Temple project. I'll give a link to it, and it has a static mesh, a 3D mesh, which has a material applied to it that simulates sort of a God ray. At the moment I've got both Exponential Height Fog and this God ray on, and I'm just fiddling around with the different parameters to see what I can change. These actual God rays are meant to be from a big cavern, a very long column of light in a very sort of epic scene, so I'm not quite sure whether they're the best suited to demonstrate this, but we do what we can. Oh yeah, that's a bit overkill, but you kind of get the sort of the idea. You can also use a 2D fog card, and I'll use one later on for something, but I decided to add a bit of caustics, a bit of sort of dust floating in the air, which I got from a pack which I will link below. It's a sort of Niagara starting pack, which has a bunch of helpful stuff, and if you want to go in and tweak it, you can do. I won't even pretend I know what all these do, but that is basically under the hood of a Niagara particle, all the various parameters that you can mess about with. All I do know is you should compile and save. So yeah, you can see the sort of dust bits floating around. So I wanted to show you about since we've got all this volumetric fog, how we can affect spotlights in an interior scene. And if you muck around with the scattering intensity, which, as I've indicated there, requires that the exponential height fog is on, otherwise it won't work so well. And obviously the darker the scene is, the more you're going to see your spotlight. So I also had a crack at emissive lighting. This is essentially where you sign an emissive material to a mesh. So in this case, I'm just using a cube that I've taken from the actor menu on the left. And this original emissive material, I can't remember where I got it from, but it's not really doing much in terms of shining light everywhere. The emissive boost didn't work, so I used a custom one, and this is basically the setup. And the emissive power is a parameter that will appear in the material instance there, and you can adjust that to boost the lighting. Obviously too much will look rubbish. I understand that UE5 handles these emissive lighting setups better, so that's good news. So I also messed around with rectangle lights, which I think are my favorite. Because the emissive light obviously didn't cast enough, I thought that we just pretend it did by using a rectangle light below it. And there's obviously various things you can tweak in terms of width, height, and also barn door angles and lengths, which dictate how the light comes down, and the soft shadows that you can achieve. I like rectangle lighting because it seems to give you more control over the softness of lighting compared to a point light, which also does the same, but it's kind of not as controllable, if that makes sense. So I just flipped it over because I wanted to use it as a fill light for her face and just compare the difference between a point light sort of filling in and a rectangle light. And obviously it depends what effect you're going for, but in my case I would say 9 times out of 10 a rectangle light is something that I like the look a bit more. But don't get me wrong, point lights always have their place. So I'll do a little comparison. There we have the images. So the one on the left is before denoising, so you'll see a bit of that blurry shadow going on, but it can be repaired quite easily. So yeah, I like rectangle light. The hair is a bit funny on the right as well, but I'm sure with enough fiddling around you could fix it in point light. But yeah, so I use the rectangle light as a top light, and I noticed that the hair was not being affected by this so-called rim light, shoulders, etc. It was fine, and this is mostly due to me. I mean, I was experimenting with the hair, and I made and imported my own, and I've obviously not done an amazing job with it. CC3 hair is probably okay. this is why lighting is important. When the lights come on in the nightclub, yeah. So yeah, like I said, it's not ideal. So I actually went and grabbed a Metahuman Groom hair. I have tutorials on how you can do that, and I will try and link them. And obviously the lighting's not great on that one. But I fiddled around with it, and I was actually using a point light as rim light, and that works better for me. Just makes the image pop out a little bit more. And I use the rectangle light more just for her shoulders. Though I did find that it kind of made this sort of little square light image at the back. So in the end, I think I just switched it off anyway and used a different light as a rim light. Yeah, so you basically use different lights to achieve the effect that you want. I'm actually using a spotlight to illuminate the desk, I think. And I thought I'd throw in a bit of fog since I was here, and I just copy and pasted that fog mesh from earlier coming through the window, just to see what kind of an atmospheric effect it can give us. And I actually also decided to add a fog card, which is a 2D plane. So it's flat as opposed to the other one, which is 3D. And it's got a little sort of animated texture going on. I quite like using these. They seem to have a nice stylized effect. And it's quite interesting that where you move them in relation to the camera and the character obviously also affects the whole feel of the scene. A quick tip: if you want to get rid of the gizmos, you just press G to toggle them on and off. And I just thought I'd add something to the foreground. You can see the shadows like really sharp there. So you just need to locate the light source and play around with the radius to soften it. And then you can later on look at the samples per pixel to remove any artifacts. At least this is the workflow I use. If you have a better one, please let me know in the comments below. I wouldn't claim to be an expert on Unreal, and it's always good to learn new things about it because I find it a very good program to render my images in. I mentioned earlier that there was this screen percentage trick to get better images. It's best just to leave that and do it when rendering in the movie render queue, and just put it as one of your custom variables. And yeah, that is another tutorial for another day. Anyway, I hope you have found some of this useful. I trust you'll have a great week ahead, and as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next video. You've been watching Mr. H Makes, and I'm Mr. H, signing off.